we're going to go a little off script tonight. Let's go to Revelation 21. Just given the circumstances of the week, pretty much had a lesson done for tonight, and I was just like, my mind's not there, my heart's not there for that, and it's just like, let's just do something else on this a little bit more, maybe on the positive side for an evening. And I was kind of starting to prepare my thoughts a little bit too for Sunday. Just looking at where we're going to be in 1 Corinthians, starting chapter 15, which is all about the resurrection. And what timing could that be for everything going on? And but we're just going to have a few thoughts about heaven, I think. Just kind of where my mind's been for a little while. And I think as believers, when we know a believer that's gone to be with the Lord, that's where our mind goes, or at least I hope that's where it goes as well. As, we have a tremendous hope. And knowing that, I'm thinking about Gail and getting ready for Friday, that he's with the Lord. I say it doesn't make it easier. I would think in some ways it has to make it a little bit easier, considering the alternative. That would be unbearable. And so, certainly we're thankful, knowing where Gail is, that he's with the Lord, envious to some extent that he made it there before the rest of us. It would be better if we could just all went together. But in thinking about heaven, it just, you hear people talk about things when these things come up. And I'm not trying to be critical or anything like that, but just in general, people have ideas about what heaven's going to be like. You have the guy who is the avid hunter, and, so he's in heaven, and they kind of picture, well, now he's hunting all the time. Or you have the guy who was the avid fisherman, and so, well, he's fishing out on the Crystal Sea or something like that, And when we think about heaven and when we think about the next life, I think the activities are going to be radically different than how we could ever imagine. It's hard to imagine in some ways when we think of the things that we enjoy or the things that people enjoy, them getting to heaven and not having any concern or desire for those things and being interested in things totally different. I know Gail enjoyed hunting, he enjoyed fishing, he enjoyed all of his craftsmanship and everything like that, but I'll guarantee you he's not the slightest bit concerned or desirous of any of those things right now. When we get to heaven and we get in the presence of the Lord, the things that amuse us and entertain us and the things that we enjoy on this earth is going to be radically different. We're going to have a totally different opinion of that. Those things are going to no longer be a desire for us because we're going to be in the presence of Jesus. And those things that we enjoy so much are not going to be the things that bring us joy anymore. Because we know that heaven is going to be a place that is a place of pure, unimaginable, endless joy and pleasure. David tells us in Psalm 16, verse 11, "In thy presence is fullness of joy." So it's not that it's, an overwhelming joy. It's the fullness of joy. If you take a container and you fill it full, if you say this container is full, you mean you can't put anything else in there. Nothing can go beyond that. It's impossible to have any more joy than we would have in the presence of the Lord. And that's what David's saying here. In God's presence is the fullness of joy. There's nothing that surpasses that as far as joy goes. And he says, at thy right hand are pleasures forevermore. You know, we experience different pleasures here on the earth. Good and bad. But we experience different pleasures here on the earth. But they're always temporary. I mean, that's why people are thrill seekers, right? You get that, you have adrenaline junkies and dopamine junkies because they live for the excitement and they live for that stimulation from those chemicals. But it's always fading and always takes a little bit more and a little bit more. But it's not the way it's going to be when we get to heaven. To be in the presence of the Lord is going to be the fullness of all pleasure. And it's going to be enduring forever. In the presence of God for the believer, there is no boredom. There's no mundane. You know, you watch the movies or the cartoons. You remember the old Mickey Mouse cartoons or the Donald Duck cartoons where Donald Duck gets killed and he goes to heaven, and he's floating up on a cloud and he's got this halo and he's just playing a harp, and heaven's kind of pictured as all we're going to do is just sit on a cloud somewhere and play a harp. Well, that seems like that might be a little boring. Now, I would also say that if that is the way it was, which it's not, but if it was that way, I think this verse would still be true because our mind and heart would be totally set on that as being the fullness of joy and pleasure. But there's not going to be any boredom. There's not going to be any mundane. There's not going to be any sorrow, no pain. There's only going to be pure, unending joy and bliss. Now, in Revelation 21 here, we are talking about the new heavens and the new earth. But the reason this is significant is because when we think about the tribulation period, which before this would be 1,007 years, during the tribulation, hell comes to earth. And it's basically for 7 years, it's going to be almost literally hell on earth. During the kingdom age, when Jesus is ruling and reigning in Jerusalem, there's still going to be death. Not of those who have been translated and perfected, but those people that will have gone through the tribulation period, those people who will have gone into the millennium then and continue to have babies still in their natural bodies, there will be death for some of those people. And some of those people will experience the pain of having friends and loved ones die. And so they will know that. But here when we get to Revelation 21, we have the new heaven and the new earth. And it says here in chapter 21, verse 1, and this is where heaven comes to earth, essentially. And that's why we bring this up. Because what he's describing here is heaven, just it's a different location than what it is at present. Chapter 21 and verse 1, I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth were passed away, and there was no more sea. And I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven. Now, when he talks about the sea there, I don't know that he's talking about water as here on the earth. I don't think we're talking about the absence of water on the planet. When he's talking about the sea, so in Genesis 1, when God creates heaven and the earth, he creates the heaven and the earth. He creates one heaven and one earth. Now, it's not until like day 2 or 3 that he begins to divide up the heavens into first, second, and third, and where the first heaven is the open firmament where the birds fly, and then you have the stars and such getting put in the firmament of heaven as well. But then there's an... Is that the furnace? Is that the AC? Okay. And then you have the third heaven, which is where God dwells. Now, the Psalms, and I didn't think to write it down, I forget where it is, but the Psalms talk about the waters at present that be above the heavens. So there is actually some sort of a, when you think of outer space, is there an end to outer space? Sure there is. And I know what's on the outside of that. What brings it to an end? There is some sort of a casing of water around outer space. And that is what divides the creation from the presence of God. And I think that's what this sea is actually a reference to. That this sea, this separation of God the Father from the creation, will be no more. It will have been eliminated at this point. Because notice verse 2, I, John, saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down from God out of heaven, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. And I heard a great voice out of heaven saying, Behold, the tabernacle of God is with men, and he will dwell with them, and they shall be his people, and God himself shall be with them and be their God. And God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes. There shall be no more death, neither sorrow nor crying, neither shall there be any more pain, for the former things are passed away. So he's describing here what heaven is like. Only here, heaven is coming to earth, to the new earth, to the new heaven. But this is what it is in the presence of God. It is a place where there is no more death. And anybody that goes to heaven doesn't die anymore, right? There's no sorrow, there's no crying, there's no more pain. All that is past. And that's the point that he's making. And when the Bible talks about God shall wipe away all tears from their eyes, it's not saying that, well, and I've heard people say this, and I'm sure at some point in the past I said it too. You know, God doesn't wipe away tears till after the millennium, and so we're going to have 1,000 years or 1,007 years from the time of the rapture, and we're going to weep and all this stuff. The Scripture actually doesn't say that at all. The point that he's making here is that there won't be any more of that to exist. There's not going to be any more sorrow. Sorrow will no longer exist. Because even for those in heaven, sorrow still exists here on the earth. But once heaven comes down to earth, all of those things that we experience, the pain, the suffering, the sorrow, the agony, all these things that we experience, it's going to be gone. It will be no more. And that's exactly how it is in heaven. People in heaven are not agonizing, they're not crying, they're not sorrowful, and if they're crying, I guess it could be happy tears, maybe. But heaven is a place of joy and of pleasure. You know, we experience certain spiritual experiences along our short pilgrimage here on the earth. Probably all of us know what it's like, either in your own personal, private time as you're studying the Scriptures and meditating and praying. And while we don't want to base things on feelings, but you know that it's different. And it's like you have these times where it's like God steps into the room. Now we know He's always there. We know that mentally. But there are times where He allows us to sense that presence. It's like He pulls the curtain back just a little bit, just enough for us to know, yeah, I'm right here. You have those times in church services. You have those times in prayer meetings. You have those times in singing. And it's just something is different. It's like God has stepped into the room. Now, He's been there the whole time. But He allows us to experience that just a little bit. But all of those spiritual experiences, the greatest spiritual experience you and I can experience here on the earth in this life is just a small little taste of what we're going to experience when we're in the presence of the Lord actually. You know, as we consider life, Job 14 tells us, man that is born of a woman is of few days and full of trouble. And that is certainly the case. Our lives are full of trouble. It doesn't take long either. You know, you have some people, it's just the moment they come out, not only are they trouble, but their life is full of trouble. And they have all sorts of issues. But that is the way our life is. Let's go to Philippians chapter 1. Because despite the troubles of this life, as believers, we have a wonderful confidence. We have a tremendous hope that others don't have. Notice here in chapter 1, Philippians 1, in verse number 21, Paul says, "For to me to live is Christ, and to die is a terrible thing." What does he say? It's gain. You say, Paul, that doesn't make any sense. Aren't we supposed to live for the now? Paul says, man, the best thing that's coming is after I die. I'm going to gain something. Notice he says in verse 22, but if I live in the flesh, this is the fruit of my labor, yet what I shall choose I wot not, or I don't know, in essence. He says, I'm in a strait betwixt two. Now, remember, Paul at this time, at this point, Paul has already suffered shipwreck 3 times, actually 4 times. You know, he's suffered imprisonment, perils of water, perils of his own countrymen. You know, a night and a day he spent in the deep, he said. He's already been stoned to death 1 time. Right? Beaten with rods. So Paul's already been to heaven and come back. You know, 2 Corinthians chapter 12 talks about his experience. And so you could really understand the tension that Paul lived in, because he's already been there and experienced heaven. And so he's really wanting to go back. But he also knows it's necessary for me to be here right now. And so he says, I'm in a strait betwixt two. He says, I'm in a very difficult spot. There's kind of 2 things that I really desire, because I have a desire to depart and to be with Christ, which is far better. I don't know if that's really the attitude that we have. I think we have almost an opposite attitude. Because he says, to depart and to be with Christ is far better, nevertheless to abide with you is more needful for you. For me to abide in the flesh is more needful for you. See, I think sometimes we almost think of it the opposite way, that to be here would be better, but it's necessary to go there. It's kind of how we live our life, because we get so attached. You know, I'm guilty of this just as much as anybody. But for Paul, he says, the difficult thing for me is I'm really struggling with my desire here, because I really want to go to be with Jesus, and that would be superb. That would be top of my list. But at the same time, I'm torn because I know you guys really need me. And so Paul knows. He says, you know, I'm stuck here because of you, but when the Lord's done, I'll go. But for him, he says, my desire is to go and to be with Christ. You know, death kind of comes to us as an unsympathetic landlord with an eviction notice. It's kind of how it seems. Until you consider what it is that he's evicting us from and where he's evicting us to. Right? Because for the believer, where are we going? The worst that's happening to us is we're being removed from this earthly tabernacle that we wander around in to go to heaven and into the presence of the Lord. You know, and the hope that we have, it should never cause us to become careless. Some people can have that. You can easily see how Paul, having seen heaven and knowing that he's going there, could have just kind of sat back like, you know, fellas, look, I've already been there, done that, got the shirt. You know, we can just kind of cruise along here and everything's going to be just fine. But really, knowing that where we're going should not cause us to be careless or unconcerned. It should cause us to long for heaven. Just like a prisoner wanting to be free. Let's go to 2 Corinthians 5. Paul talks about this in 2 Corinthians 5. Second Corinthians 5:8, Paul says, we are confident, I say, and willing rather to be absent from the body and to be present with the Lord. So we're willing, and we're ready. And you see, I don't think Paul really had a death wish. I don't think that's what's going on here. I think here's a man, he's tired. He's just ready to go. Whenever the Lord's ready, I am more than willing to go to be with the Lord. But this is the great confidence that the moment we die, we're not held in any limbo. There's no purgatory. There's no purging. There's no wandering around the earth, like a spook somewhere haunting places until we kind of make our peace, and then we get to, finish our unfinished business, and then we get to cross over into the afterlife. But we go directly into the presence of the Lord the moment we take our last breath, the moment our heart beats the last time. We take our next breath in God's presence. That is just an amazing thought. Let's look at Isaiah 57. Isaiah 57. And this was a passage that came to mind. I mean, Gail was certainly no spring chicken, but he wasn't old. Now, 20 years ago, I may have thought 60 was old. I don't think 60 is that old anymore. Like, man, you're just getting you're over the hill as far as the prime of your life, but man, you still got a lot of miles left. Kind of what it seems like. Isaiah 57, notice here verse 1, the righteous perish, and no man layeth it to heart, or they don't think of it and take it seriously. It says, and merciful men are taken away, none considering that the righteous is taken away from the evil to come. It's kind of an interesting thought. We think about how tragic it is of somebody dying too young. But that could be the Lord's mercy to prevent something even worse or more tragic coming later. But notice when they're taken away, where do they go? Verse 2, he shall enter into peace, they shall rest in their beds, each one walking in his uprightness. Revelation 14:13, blessed are the dead which die in the Lord. Obviously, you have to qualify that. Not everybody that dies is blessed, but those which die in the Lord, that they may rest from their labors. 2 Corinthians 12:4, Paul refers to heaven as paradise. It's actually an interesting word. It means like a park. Paradise. Not necessarily a playground park, but a park, a place of beauty. Let's go to Ezekiel 1. Look at a couple more passages, and then we'll be done. Go to Ezekiel. I guess if I turn in the right direction here. When the Bible talks about heaven, it always describes it in terms of glory and light. And we have some difficulty, the writers of the Scripture had some difficulty too, describing many of the heavenly things that they saw. The Bible does talk quite a bit about heaven. Not nearly as much as it just talks about and describes hell, but it does talk about it. And you can tell that those who are writing about what they saw were having some difficulty. And we certainly see that with Ezekiel, see it with John a little bit in Revelation. And that shouldn't surprise us. Remember when Paul says in 2 Corinthians 12, when Paul went to heaven, it says that he saw things that it was unlawful to speak of. Meaning, I just didn't have words that I could put to it. I couldn't talk about it. It's just, you can't fathom it. You can't put it into words. What's there? Well, in Ezekiel and Revelation and Isaiah, they do their best, and of course they do it under inspiration. Well, let's kind of read through here, and more just to get the description. Because what we see here is kind of similar to what Isaiah sees in Isaiah chapter 6. Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah, when he's called to be a prophet, he is ushered right into the throne room in heaven, so to speak. And he sees the Lord up on the throne. Well, here in Ezekiel, that throne has now come down to the earth, or at least it looks like it. But he sees what it's like in the presence of the Lord. So notice here, now it came to pass, verse 1, Ezekiel 1:1. Came to pass in the 30th year, talking about Ezekiel's 30th year. Ezekiel's a Levite, which means he's entering into his priesthood. Came to pass in the 30th year, in the 4th month, and the 5th day of the month, as I was among the captives of the river Kebar, that the heavens were open, and I saw visions of God. In the 5th day of the month, which was the 5th year of King Jehoiakim's captivity, the word of the Lord came expressly unto Ezekiel the priest, the son of Buzi, in the land of the Chaldeans by the river Kebar, and the hand of the Lord was there upon him. And I looked, and behold, a whirlwind came out of the north, a great cloud and fire enfolding itself. And a brightness was about it, and out of the midst thereof, as the color of amber, out of the midst of the fire. Also out of the midst thereof came the likeness of 4 living creatures. And this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man. Now, I think about this for a minute, because what Ezekiel's going to describe here, these 4 creatures, in essence, are ushering the chariot of God. So if you picture, in essence, remember the priest, there was 4 priests that carried the Ark of the Covenant as the Ark of the Covenant went from place to place. This is kind of a similar idea here, is that these 4 creatures are carrying the presence of the Lord. And basically on their shoulders, or actually above their wings, there's a platform in which the throne of God is. And it says that it's exceeding high above the earth. So these are enormous creatures. These are not like, while they have the appearance of a man as far as their shape is concerned, these creatures are enormously tall creatures. To picture this, so there's 4 living creatures, verse 5. And this was their appearance. They had the likeness of a man. Every one had 4 faces. Every one had 4 wings. And their feet were straight feet. And the sole of their feet was like the sole of a calf's foot. So they have straight feet. So their legs, while their torso is very human-like, their legs are shaped more like a calf or a deer or something like that. And they sparkled like the color of burnished brass. Now, this is actually a really interesting concept here, because it's a shining, polished bronze. But what he's about to describe in just a moment is it's glowing, like it's been heated up and glowing. I remember when we lived in Petoskey, one of the houses we lived in, it was the first time I had ever dealt with wood stove or anything like that. And the chimney was shaped terribly, because it had like a S shape to it. And I didn't know that you're not supposed to use pine, but we used a lot of pine and stuff like that winter. And there was one day we had a chimney fire, basically. It didn't erupt into the house, fortunately. But I remember we smelled something, so I ran downstairs where the stove was, and I looked, and that pipe, where that first elbow was glowing red. And it looked like you could almost see through it, because you could see, I don't know if it was the waves from the heat or what, but it looked like you could see the flames inside of it. But if you could kind of picture that, that's what these creatures look like. In Isaiah chapter 6, Isaiah speaks of the seraphim, which are basically, I think, the same type of creature. The word seraphim just means the burning ones or the fiery ones, meaning that their bodies have the appearance of fire, a glowing, raging fire. And so he says, these are the color of burnished brass, verse 8, and they had the hands of a man under their wings. So their wings would have been more like a reptilian or a mammal-like wing, kind of like a bat. They had on their four sides, and they had their faces and their wings. Their wings were joined one to another. They turned not when they went. They went everyone straight forward. As for the likeness of their faces, they four had the face of a man, the face of a lion on the right side, and they four had the face of an ox, and on the left side, they four also had the face of an eagle. Thus were their faces, and their wings were stretched upward. 2 wings of every one were joined one to another, and 2 covered their bodies. And they went every one straight forward. Whither the Spirit was to go, they went, and they turned not when they went. As for the likeness of the living creatures, their appearance was like burning coals of fire, and like the appearance of lamps. It went up and down among the living creatures, and the fire was bright. And out of the fire went forth lightning. I can't even imagine what this would have been like for Ezekiel to see these creatures and just kind of, I almost picture kind of like a panoramic type view of him just kind of beginning to walk around these creatures, and here they are standing way up high, and he's just trying to take all this in, and he sees these creatures, and they're just this bright, glowing, fiery body that they have, and these wings, and then their faces. Verse 14, living creatures ran and returned as the appearance of a flash of lightning. Now as I beheld the living creatures, behold, one wheel came upon the earth by the living creatures with his 4 faces. The appearance of the wheels and their work was like unto the color of a beryl. So this platform that's carrying the throne of God that the creatures are ushering around has 4 wheels, and the 4 creatures are besides each of the wheels. And they color like a beryl. A beryl is kind of like a pale green color. They 4 had one likeness, and their appearance and their work was as it were of a wheel in the middle of a wheel. When they went upon their 4 sides, and they turned not when they went. As for their rings, that would be kind of like the rim on the inside, the inner part of the wheel. They were so high that they were dreadful, and their rings were full of eyes round about them 4. And when the living creatures went, the wheels went by them. When the living creatures were lifted up from the earth, the wheels were lifted up. Whithersoever the Spirit was to go, they went. Thither was their spirit to go, and the wheels were lifted up over against them. For the spirit of the living creatures was in the wheels. When those went, these went. When those stood, these stood. When those were lifted up from the earth, the wheels were lifted up from the earth, from over against them. For the spirit of the living creature was in the wheels. And the likeness of the firmament upon the heads of the living creatures, or there was an expanse, is what that's talking about, was as the color of a terrible crystal, stretched forth over their heads above. And under the firmament were their wings straight, the one toward the other. Every one had 2, which covered on this side, and every one had 2, which covered on that side, their bodies. And when they went, I heard the noise of their wings, like the noise of great waters, as the voice of the Almighty, the voice of speech, as the noise of an host. When they stood, they let down their wings. There was a voice from the firmament that was over their heads when they stood and had let down their wings. And above the firmament that was over their heads was the likeness of a throne, as the appearance of a sapphire stone. So it's kind of a sky blue color. And upon the likeness of the throne was the likeness as the appearance of a man above upon it. Now who's that? That's Jesus. And I saw as the color of amber, as the appearance of fire round about within it. From the appearance of his loins even upward, and from the appearance of his loins even downward, I saw as it were the appearance of fire, and had brightness round about it. So when the Bible talks about our God being a consuming fire, he is. It's exactly what it means. And the appearance of the bow that is in the cloud in the day of rain, so was the appearance of the brightness round about. This was the appearance of likeness of the glory of the Lord. When I saw it, I fell upon my face, and I heard a voice of one that spake. And what a magnificent picture. And some of it is, it's kind of hard to tell exactly. It is how much of this, to some degree, is 100% literal, the actual way it is, or is some of this symbolic language because it is apocalyptic literature, and he's just trying to describe what he's seeing. As far as what I can tell here, I think all of this is exactly the way it is. But these creatures, they're bright, they're glowing, they're kind of the color of bronze, but they're also the color of fire, and proceeding from them is lightning. Absolutely amazing. And then he sees, as he works his way up, he gets above the creatures, and there's this crystal platform that's there, and then there's a throne, and then there's a man sitting on the throne who looks in every bit like fire. Now let's go to Revelation 4. And as Ezekiel ends his vision, he ends with the theme of the throne. But when John picks up his vision, he begins with the throne scene. And it's actually really interesting because you have these parallels between John in Revelation and Ezekiel in the book of Ezekiel. Both Ezekiel and John, I think, saw each other. This is just my personal thing, because Ezekiel, when he's describing the Jerusalem and the millennial temple, he sees a man with a reed going around measuring it. I think that was John. And John sees a man, talks to a man, who gives him a reed, and I think that was Ezekiel. And that's just me, but that's kind of a weird thing. But Revelation chapter 4. Now, the theme here is the throne. He mentions it several times here. The book of Revelation, I think, mentions the throne of God some 40 times, or maybe 43 times, something like that, throughout the book of Revelation. Heaven, the central piece of heaven, or actually what makes heaven, heaven, is the throne and the one who sits on the throne. And so he says, verse 1, after this I looked, and behold, a door was open in heaven, and the first voice which I heard was as it were of a trumpet talking with me, which said, Come up hither, and I will show thee things which must be hereafter. And immediately I was in the Spirit, and behold, a throne was set in heaven. And one sat on the throne, and he that sat was to look upon like a jasper and a sardine stone. Now, jasper stone, some of these, it's hard to tell exactly because names change. And some stones we call a certain name now. They didn't call it that same name. They've switched. But jasper, the best I could tell, is like a quartz crystal. Is kind of what that looks like. And then a sardine stone is a sardius. It's a red ruby-like stone. And so the one that sat upon the throne was like a jasper and a sardine stone, kind of, again, that fire imagery again. And there was a rainbow round about the throne in sight like unto an emerald. Round about the throne were 24 seats. Upon the seats I saw 24 elders sitting, clothed in white raiment, and they had on their heads crowns of gold. And these elders are the gathered church after the rapture. Now the throne proceeded lightnings and thunderings and voices. This is to kind of take us back to what Moses saw on Mount Sinai when he took the elders of Israel up there and he was before God. And God comes down in this pillar of smoke, and the mountain is on fire, and God's speaking. And this is exactly the imagery that it uses. And there were 7 lamps of fire burning before the throne, which are the 7 spirits of God. This is the fullness of the Spirit that was on Jesus, according to Isaiah 11. Before the throne there was a sea of glass, like unto crystal. That platform that Ezekiel saw. And in the midst of the throne, and round about the throne, were 4 beasts full of eyes before and behind. The first beast was like a lion, the second beast like a calf, and the third beast had face as a man, and the fourth beast was like a flying eagle, and the 4 beasts had each of them 6 wings about him, and they were full of eyes within, and they rest not day and night, saying, Holy, 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 Lord God Almighty, which was and is to come. And when those beasts give glory and honor and thanks to him that sat on the throne, who liveth forever and ever, the 24 elders fall down before him that sat on the throne, and worship him that liveth forever and ever, and cast their crowns before the throne, saying, Thou art worthy, O Lord, to receive glory and honor and power, for thou hast created all things, and for thy pleasure they are created. They were created. So this is what heaven looks like. It's a throne. It's where God is. There's one more thing I want to point out here about heaven, is that there's a temple there. And this I thought was really interesting as I was kind of looking at this afternoon. There is a temple there. And if you jump back just a little bit here to chapter 3, I guess probably across the page in most of our Bibles, verse 12. Him that overcometh, and we know from John's, Theodore, stop. We know from John's other writings that the overcomer is the person who is truly saved. Every saved person is an overcomer. Him that overcometh, he says, will I make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out. I will write upon him the name of my God and the name of the city of my God, which is New Jerusalem, which cometh down out of heaven from my God. I will write upon him my new name. Say a pillar in the temple, that doesn't sound very interesting. And who wants to be a pillar? You know, when you think of a pillar, pillar doesn't do much. It supports an edifice of some kind, but it's just kind of stationary. Sounds kind of like a boring existence, just kind of stand there for all of eternity. Is this saying that we're going to be in God's temple and we're just going to stand there and stand at attention all the time and not do anything else? Well, I don't think that's what it has in mind. Let's look a little bit farther. Let's go to chapter 7. Chapter 7, verse 15. And this is speaking of those that come out of the tribulation period, but either way, this would be the same because these are those that were saved and they were killed during the tribulation, so now they're in heaven. It says, verse 15, Therefore are they before the throne of God, and serve him day and night in his temple. And he that sitteth on the throne shall dwell among them. So they're serving him. But what is this temple? Notice in chapter 21 again. And kind of back where we started. But chapter 21 describes what this temple is. Chapter 21, down to verse number 21. He's describing this New Jerusalem. And this New Jerusalem is made up of believers. Writes that name upon us. Verse 21 says, 12 gates. Verse 22, actually, sorry. I saw no temple therein. Watch this. For the Lord God Almighty and the Lamb are the what? The temple. And the city had no need of the sun, neither of the moon, to shine in it, for the glory of God did lighten it, and the Lamb is the light thereof. So the temple in heaven, what is the temple in heaven? It's God. It's Jesus. We get to go be in him. We get to experience what it is to be in Christ to the fullest degree possible. God and the Lamb are the temple. It's not a building. It's just getting to be there with him. And what a joy to know for the believer that one day the Lord is going to come back for us. Jesus has gone to prepare a place for us. He says, if I go to prepare a place, I will come again and receive you unto myself, that where I am, there you may be also. We're going to dwell with him forever. All right, that's all I got. Just a few thoughts.